Pulaski, Tennessee, summer 1932. 800 men are building a mansion in the middle of the Great Depression. 25% unemployment across America. Families losing everything. Bread lines stretching for blocks in every major city. And here in rural Tennessee, limestone walls are rising 3 stories high. Tudor Revival architecture, 40-foot ceilings, swimming pools, tennis courts, 70 worker cottages, 30 barns, a private mausoleum on a hill where the owner plans to rest forever. The workers get paid in cash and candy bars, Milky Ways shipped from Chicago. The man writing the checks? Clarence Mars, a candy millionaire who couldn't walk properly until he was 8 years old. He'll be dead in 2 years, too soon to see his horses win the Kentucky Derby. Too soon to watch his widow prove she could run his empire better than he ever did. Too soon to know that his body won't stay in that mausoleum, that 11 years after his death, his family will dig him up and move him to Minnesota. The monument he built for eternity couldn't hold him for a decade. Here's the question nobody asks about Milky Way Farm. When you build a palace during the worst economic collapse in American history, are you creating jobs or flaunting wealth? And when your family abandons everything you built, what does that say about American dynasties? If you want to know what happened to the 2,800-acre estate where candy money met Depression-era desperation, and why people now pay to crawl through mud where Kentucky Derby champions once trained, keep watching. Clarence Mars was born in Minnesota in 1883. His father ran a grist mill, modest income, the kind of life measured in bushels of grain and seasonal work. Before Franklin could walk, polio took his legs. Not completely, but enough. He limped. He couldn't run. Physical labor was impossible for a farm boy in the 1880s. So his mother, Alva, taught him the only thing she could: candy making, hand-dipping chocolates in their kitchen, judging caramel temperature by sound, the alchemy of sugar and heat. Franklin couldn't play with other boys, so he mastered candy instead. By the time he was 19, he'd married a schoolteacher named Ethel. By 20, he had a son, Forrest Edward Mars, born 1903. Then Franklin did what he'd do for the next 20 years. He started a candy business and watched it fail. Seattle failed, Tacoma failed, Vancouver failed. Franklin filed bankruptcy multiple times, moved his family constantly, chased opportunities that dissolved the moment he arrived. In 1910, Ethel had enough. The marriage ended. Franklin left. Their 6-year-old son, Forrest, barely saw his father again. That abandonment would echo for a century. Forrest would spend his life proving he was better than the father who rejected him. And the corporate secrecy that defines Mars Incorporated today, that's Forrest's wound, still bleeding. Franklin remarried immediately. Another woman named Ethel Healy this time. History doesn't record if the name was coincidence or pattern. The failures continued through the 1910s. More candy shops, more creditors, more bankruptcies. By 1920, Franklin Mars was approaching 40 with nothing to show for 2 decades except debt. But he kept trying. In 1923, everything changed. Franklin was watching people order malted milk drinks at soda fountains, popular across America. He wondered if that flavor could be captured in candy form. The result was the Milky Way bar. Fluffy whipped nougat, malted milk flavor, caramel layer, milk chocolate coating. Larger size for the same price because whipped nougat was cheap to produce. Nothing like it existed. First-year sales, $800,000. That's roughly $13 million in today's money. Within 2 years, Franklin built a factory in Chicago. By 1930, he'd launched Snickers, named after the family horse. By 1932, Three Musketeers, 3 of the most successful candy bars in American history, all created within a decade. The man who failed for 20 years had finally succeeded, and he wanted everyone to know it. In August 1929, Franklin and Ethel purchased 2,800 acres in Giles County, Tennessee. Rolling farmland, nothing special. Dozens of similar properties existed within 50 miles. What made this tract different was what Franklin intended to build on it. 2 months later, the stock market collapsed. Black Thursday, Black Tuesday, billions in paper wealth vanished. Banks failed, businesses closed, unemployment climbed from 3% to 9% by year's end. Franklin could have stopped, the land purchase could have been unwound, but he proceeded. Total estimated investment in Milky Way Farm over the next 4 years, between $5 and $10 million. Some sources suggest the actual total reached $16 million. In today's money, that's somewhere between $90 million and $300 million, spent building a pleasure palace while America starved. The numbers were staggering. 2,800 acres eventually expanding to 3,000, a manor house of 25,000 square feet, 35 rooms including 21 bedrooms, 70 worker cottages built simultaneously, 30 barns of varying sizes, 35 miles of white wooden fencing, 20 miles of internal roads, a full-sized horse racing track, an Olympic-sized swimming pool, tennis courts, landscaped grounds, and a private mausoleum where Franklin planned to rest forever. At peak construction in 1932, 800 men were working on the property. That made Milky Way Farm the largest employer in Giles County during the worst year of the Depression. Those workers received wages, $2 to $4 per day for laborers, $5 to $8 for skilled masons, better than nothing, which is what most of America had. But they also received something else, free candy bars, Milky Ways from the Chicago factory, and small loans when families fell behind on rent. The candy bars were marketing. Workers took them home, their families ate them, neighbors saw Mars products, free advertising that cost Franklin pennies. The loans were control. A worker in debt to his employer doesn't quit, doesn't complain, doesn't organize. Franklin was generous by Depression standards. He paid when others couldn't. But generosity doesn't erase the fundamental inequality. He was building a monument to himself, while his workers built it for survival wages. Local newspapers celebrated the jobs. Editorials questioned the morality. Did Tennessee need a Candy King's palace, or did Tennessee need food and schools? Franklin never answered publicly. He built what he wanted. The architect was James F. Drake. His challenge, create a cohesive aesthetic across 30 structures while maintaining functionality for agricultural operations. The solution was Tudor Revival for the manor house, Spanish-inspired architecture for the barns, all unified by local limestone quarried nearby. The main house rose 3 stories above ground with a full basement. The living room featured a 40-foot ceiling with exposed timber beams, cathedral proportions for a private home. The dining room table seated 30 people, reportedly the largest private dining table in Tennessee. Oak beams, some exceeding 40 feet in length, slate roofing imported and expensive, leaded glass windows custom-made, marble fireplaces. The exterior was designed to be elegant and relatively simple. Vertical lines emphasizing height. The facade was local limestone and brick. The 70 worker cottages weren't temporary housing. They were permanent structures, stone or wood construction, functional kitchens, 2 to 4 rooms each, designed to house families, not just single workers. Franklin needed permanent staff, groundskeepers, stable hands, farm workers. The cottages ensured labor would always be available. The 30 barns served multiple purposes: horse stables for different stages of training,
Hereford breeding program Franklin started, equipment storage, feed storage, workshop facilities. One barn became an architectural landmark, the octagonal barn. 8-sided geometry, local limestone construction, Spanish-inspired arched doorways, central ventilation system, built to last centuries. It still stands today.
On a prominent hill on the estate, Franklin commissioned a private tomb. Limestone construction, classical design with columns and a formal pediment, bronze doors, interior crypts designed for multiple burials. Franklin, Ethel, perhaps their daughter Patricia. This was where Franklin Mars intended to rest forever. He was 48 years old when he commissioned it, healthy as far as anyone knew, not dying, not even particularly old by 1930s standards. But Franklin wanted control over his final resting place. After 40 years of chaos, poverty, bankruptcy, and constant moves, he'd finally achieved stability. He could dictate terms to eternity itself. The location wasn't random. Franklin chose a prominent hill visible from the manor house. Anyone approaching the main buildings would see it. Even in death, Franklin Mars would dominate his property. Why does a healthy 48-year-old man build his own tomb? Control. Franklin's life before wealth was defined by lack of control. Polio controlled his legs. Poverty controlled his opportunities. Creditors controlled his businesses. Divorce controlled his family. Now he controlled everything, his company, his fortune, his estate, and he wanted to control his death. The mausoleum was permanence made physical. Stone doesn't fail. Tombs don't go bankrupt. Death is the ultimate stability. It was also legacy. Franklin had one biological son, Forrest, who he'd abandoned. One daughter, Patricia, with his second wife. His legacy was uncertain. Would they remember him? Would they honor him? The mausoleum ensured memory. Future Mars generations would visit, stand before the limestone columns, remember Franklin Clarence Mars, the man who built all this. Except they wouldn't. Because in 11 years, Franklin's body would be removed from that mausoleum and moved to Minnesota. The tomb he built for eternity couldn't hold him for a decade. Franklin Clarence Mars died in Chicago. Heart failure, kidney disease, age 50. He had been seriously wealthy for 11 years, since Milky Way's success in 1923. He had lived in his completed Tennessee palace for less than 1 year. He never saw his horses win major races, never saw the 1936 season when Milky Way Farm would win $206,450 in purses, never saw Galahadian win the 1940 Kentucky Derby, never saw his son Forrest create M&Ms and transform Mars into a global empire worth billions. Franklin built the foundation, then died before seeing the building. His will left everything to Ethel, his second wife, not Forrest. The abandoned son was essentially written out. The bulk went to the widow. Franklin's body was placed in the mausoleum at Milky Way Farm, the tomb he'd built for this exact purpose. A private ceremony, family and close associates, not a public spectacle. Ethel was now widow and CEO. She became president of Mars Candy Company, Chicago, listed in Billboard magazine and trade publications. This was extraordinary for 1934. Women didn't run manufacturing companies. Widows inherited wealth and hired men to manage it. Ethel ran it herself. And she had plans for Milky Way Farm. Franklin had started purchasing breeding stock before he died. Professional trainers were hired, facilities were ready, but no major victories yet. Ethel committed hundreds of thousands of additional dollars. She hired top trainers, purchased champion bloodlines. 1934.
Milky Way Farm horses began racing seriously. Modest wins. 1935, more wins, growing recognition. 1936, the breakthrough. The horses Franklin bought and bred, now trained and raced under Ethel's management, dominated American tracks. Total winnings, $206,450. In 1936 dollars, equivalent to approximately $4.5 million today. Milky Way Farm became one of the most successful racing stables in the United States. Time magazine covered it, January 4, 1937 issue. Sport, Luck and Mrs. Mars. The headline alone tells you everything. Luck and Mrs. Mars, implying that Ethel's success was fortune, not skill, that a woman couldn't possibly understand thoroughbred breeding and race strategy. Ethel didn't respond publicly. She just kept winning.
Churchill Downs, Louisville, Kentucky. Post Position 7, Galahadian. Milky Way Farm. Owner, Mrs. Ethel V. Mars. The horse was a long shot. 35-1 odds, not favored, not expected to win. But Galahadian had something the favorites didn't. He was bred, raised, and trained at Milky Way Farm, the estate Franklin built, the vision Ethel executed. The race begins. Galahadian runs strategically, not leading early, conserving energy, positioning for the final stretch. Final stretch, Galahadian accelerates, overtakes the leaders, pulls ahead. He wins by 1.5 lengths. Ethel Mars stands in the winner's circle. Her horse, her victory, her vindication. Franklin never saw it. He'd been dead 6 years. His body rested in the mausoleum on the farm where Galahadian had been raised. But Ethel saw it. The woman dismissed as lucky in Time magazine, the widow who inherited a candy company and decided to dominate horse racing. She conquered the sport's summit. Winning purse, $60,150, approximately $1.3 million today. Total Milky Way Farm racing earnings from 1934 to 1940, over $300,000, about $6 to $7 million in today's money. This wasn't luck. This was strategic bloodline selection, expert trainer hiring and management, significant financial investment over 6 years, long-term planning, risk-taking in an expensive and uncertain industry. Ethel demonstrated business acumen in 2 completely different industries, manufacturing and thoroughbred racing. She succeeded in both. But history barely remembers her. Search Mars Candy history and you'll find Franklin's name repeated dozens of times. Ethel appears as a footnote. Franklin's widow inherited the company, sold the farm. The woman who ran Mars Candy Company for 11 years and won the Kentucky Derby, reduced to 2 sentences. Compare the narratives. Franklin, self-made candy genius, overcame disability, built empire through innovation and persistence. Ethel, lucky widow, inherited fortune, happened to own winning horses. The reality is different. Ethel ran a manufacturing company during the Depression, managed a 2,800-acre agricultural operation, built a racing stable that won the Kentucky Derby, made strategic business decisions that preserved and grew Franklin's fortune. But history remembers Franklin as the genius, Ethel as the footnote. By 1945, Ethel's health was failing. She was 61. The Depression had ended. World War II was ending. The world was changing. The farm was too much. It required constant oversight. Horses, staff, maintenance, finances. In March 1945, Ethel sold Milky Way Farm. New owners purchased the property. The estate continued as a horse farm under different management. But something else happened, something quieter. Sometime after the sale, possibly 1945, possibly later, Franklin's remains were exhumed from the Milky Way Farm Mausoleum and moved to Lakewood Cemetery in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Why? The official explanation: the family wanted Franklin buried in his home state, near where he was born, where his mother, Alva, was buried. But consider the timing. Franklin had been in that mausoleum for 11 years. Ethel was dying. She died in December 1945, 9 months after selling the farm. Patricia was inheriting, and the estate had been sold to strangers. Did the Mars family want Franklin's body in a tomb on property they no longer owned? Did they fear the new owners wouldn't maintain it? Did they want control over his final resting place? We don't know. The records don't explain. What we do know is this: after Franklin's body was removed, the mausoleum stood empty. A tomb without bodies, a monument without purpose. The structure Franklin built to house his remains forever, abandoned within a decade. The mausoleum still stands today, over 90 years later, limestone weathering but intact, the bronze doors still functional, the interior empty. Visitors to Milky Way Farm can see it, walk up to it, photograph it. But Franklin Mars isn't there. The man who built it never came back. Franklin wanted control over death. He wanted permanence. He wanted his family to maintain the estate forever, that Milky Way Farm would remain Mars property through generations, that descendants would visit his tomb and remember him. None of that happened. Ethel sold it. The family moved Franklin's body. The estate became someone else's property, and the tomb, the monument to permanence, became a monument to impermanence instead. December 20, 1945, Ethel V. Mars died, age 61. Billboard magazine ran her obituary. Ethel V. Mars, head of candy firm, dies. She had run Mars Candy Company for 11 years, won the Kentucky Derby, accumulated a fortune, raised a daughter in privilege, and like the first Ethel, Franklin's abandoned first wife, she disappeared into historical obscurity. The Mars empire continued. Forrest, the abandoned son, eventually took control. M&Ms conquered the world. The company grew into the secretive behemoth it remains today. But Milky Way Farm sold. The mausoleum empty. The monument Franklin and Ethel built abandoned by the family. After decades of various ownership, Milky Way Farm was sold in 2007. Buyer: Sweetbriar Development, LLC. Price: approximately $10 million. The vision was ambitious: transform the historic estate into an ultra-luxury residential development. Total projected investment: $400 million over 10 years. The plan included 300 custom luxury homes priced from $500,000 to several million each, an 18-hole championship golf course, a country club with member amenities, the preserved manor house converted to a clubhouse, preserved barns possibly used for equestrian facilities. Complete infrastructure: roads, utilities, landscaping throughout all 2,800 acres. The pitch: live where candy aristocracy once lived. Own a piece of American history. Luxury Tennessee estate community. The timing was catastrophic. 2007 was the peak of the real estate bubble. Subprime mortgages were flowing freely. Development projects assumed endless growth. Then came 2008, the financial crisis. By 2009, Sweetbriar Development defaulted on loans. The $400 million luxury development collapsed before breaking ground. Credit froze. Wealthy buyers disappeared. Banks stopped lending. The development was dead on arrival. Milky Way Farm went into foreclosure. The property that Franklin built for $10 million in Depression dollars, that sold for $10 million in 2007, was now worth what exactly? The market had collapsed.
No one was buying 2,800-acre estates, especially not estates requiring millions in deferred maintenance. The estate that had survived the Great Depression couldn't survive the Great Recession. In 2011, new owners emerged with a completely different vision. Adventure sports companies and event organizers purchased Milky Way Farm. The new purpose? Extreme obstacle course racing venue. Today, Milky Way Farm hosts Tough Mudder courses, Spartan race competitions, adventure racing events, corporate team-building exercises, and wedding receptions. The irony is almost unbearable. Franklin built this estate as a monument to aristocratic luxury, European manor on American soil, a place where candy millionaires could escape ordinary life. Now people pay $150 or more to crawl through mud, climb walls, and run through the pastures where Kentucky Derby champions once trained. The manor house rents for weddings and corporate gatherings, beautifully maintained, more accessible than it ever was under private owners. Tours are occasionally available. Photography is popular for engagement and wedding shoots. Some barns have been converted to event support, catering, storage, facilities. The octagonal barn remains an architectural landmark. Original limestone structures are mostly intact. The grounds now feature obstacle courses across the property, mud pits where pastures once stood, climbing walls near the stables. And the mausoleum still stands on the hill, empty, visible from parts of the property. Photographers occasionally feature it, but there's no public access inside. The worker cottages have fared worse, some demolished over the years, some converted to staff housing or rental units, original structures deteriorating without preservation funding. How does obstacle racing at a historic estate make money? Race entry fees $150 to $200 or more per participant. Corporate events, $10,000 to $50,000 or more. Wedding rentals, $5,000 to $20,000 or more. Spectator fees for friends and family, concessions, merchandise. The property hosts dozens of races annually, multiple weddings, corporate events, adventure camps. Estimated annual revenue, likely $2 to $5 million or more. The property probably operates profitably, which is why it survives. Modern use generates revenue that passive estate ownership never could. Is this good or bad for preservation? Without commercial use, Milky Way Farm would probably deteriorate. Maintaining 2,800 acres is expensive. Finding private buyers is difficult. Converting to an event venue, while undignified, keeps buildings standing. But the commercialization degrades historical integrity. Obstacle courses damage grounds. Franklin's vision is thoroughly betrayed, an aristocratic estate reduced to a mud-run venue. The honest assessment: preservation requires someone to pay forever. Without a funding source, commercial use is a survival strategy. And notably absent from all of this, the Mars family. No Mars family involvement in preservation, no Franklin Mars Foundation, no corporate sponsorship from Mars Incorporated. The family built it, the family abandoned it, the family moved Franklin's body, the family never looked back. Mars Incorporated now generates $45 billion in annual revenue. The company has shown zero interest in preserving Franklin's estate. No historical grants, no preservation funding, no corporate involvement. The company Franklin created erased the monument Franklin built. Real estate listings and wedding venue websites now describe Milky Way Farm as an 1,100-acre estate, stunning Tudor Revival manor, built by Mars candy founder, elegant grounds perfect for your special day. They sell the history. Franklin's name appears, Candy Baron's Palace, historic significance. But it's marketing. The history is a commodity, something to charge premium prices for. The story sells the venue. Franklin built Milky Way Farm believing it would preserve his legacy. Instead, his legacy became a selling point for strangers' weddings.
Milky Way Farm is evidence, not of what Franklin wanted, but of what actually happened. Franklin believed wealth could purchase permanence, build in stone, create legacy, ensure memory. He was wrong. The estate sold within 11 years of his death. His body was removed from the mausoleum. His family abandoned the property completely. Today, strangers run obstacle courses through his dream. Wealth preserves nothing. Buildings decay. Families scatter. Legacies commercialize. Stone is just stone. Two women named Ethel shaped the Mars empire more than history acknowledges. The first Ethel raised Forrest alone after Franklin abandoned them. She endured abandonment, outlived everyone, died in obscurity at age 98. The second Ethel ran a manufacturing company during the Depression, won the Kentucky Derby, managed 2,800 acres profitably, preserved Franklin's fortune, died and was forgotten. Meanwhile, Franklin, the man who failed for 20 years, receives all the credit. History remembers men who succeeded once. It forgets women who succeeded repeatedly. Franklin abandoned Forrest in 1910. That single act shaped everything that followed. Forrest's psychology, his obsessive need to prove himself, Mars corporate culture with its extreme secrecy and family control, modern company structure with private ownership and zero disclosure, generations of Mars heirs who barely communicate publicly. One abandonment over a century of consequences. Family wounds become corporate culture. Personal trauma becomes institutional dysfunction. Franklin employed 800 workers during the worst economic collapse in American history. He paid wages when others couldn't. He kept families fed. He also paid survival wages, not living wages, gave candy bars as compensation, marketing disguised as generosity, built a palace while workers built it for pennies, used loans to create dependency, displayed obscene wealth during mass suffering. Was he a generous employer or an exploitative tycoon? Both, simultaneously. That's how wealth works during economic collapse. Generosity and exploitation coexist. Good deeds don't erase bad structure. The mausoleum is the perfect metaphor. Franklin built a tomb for eternity. His body rested there 11 years. The mausoleum stands empty for 80+ years. This is the pattern of American dynasties. Build monuments believing they're permanent. Discover the next generation has different plans. Structures outlast intentions. Emptiness becomes the legacy. What you build survives. What you intended disappears. Ethel Mars won the 1940 Kentucky Derby. Ask random Americans who won that race. No one knows. Ask what candy company the owner ran. Silence. Ethel's greatest triumph forgotten within a generation. Achievement doesn't guarantee memory. You can win the biggest race and still be a footnote. Mars Incorporated generates $45 billion in annual revenue, employs 130,000 people worldwide, produces candy consumed on every continent. The company's founder built Milky Way Farm as a 2,800-acre monument to his success. The company has shown zero interest in preserving it. Why? Because modern Mars is Forrest's creation, not Franklin's. Forrest made it an empire, and Forrest never forgave Franklin for abandoning him. So Franklin's monument receives nothing from the company that bears his name. Corporate success erases uncomfortable origins. New leadership rewrites history. The pattern repeats throughout American history. Historic estate becomes financial burden. Developers imagine luxury resurrection. Economic reality intervenes. Property is repurposed for commercial survival. Milky Way Farm isn't unique. It's typical. Historic preservation requires endless money. When money disappears, so does preservation. And perhaps the strangest irony of all, people now pay $150 to crawl through mud on grounds where a candy millionaire built a European fantasy. They're celebrating physical endurance on an estate built by a man whose disability drove him to compensate through architecture. They're testing athletic limits where Kentucky Derby champions once trained. The entire property is dedicated to physical achievement, the one thing Franklin couldn't have in childhood. Is this poetic justice, cosmic irony, or just random repurposing? History doesn't have themes. We project meaning onto randomness.